They say the void sings if you listen close enough, but out here in the veil, all it does is scream. It's a low, constant shriek of charged particles and stellar radiation. The death rattle of 1,000 dead suns trapped in a nebula so thick it eats light for breakfast. We were born in that scream. The children of Tartarus, a city carved into the guts of a rogue asteroid. We are the remnant, the ghosts the consortium tried to erase from history. They didn't exile us with warships and blasters. They did it with laws and treaties, signing away our home, our sun, our very identity to alien stewards after the Great Collapse. Earth. They called it a failed experiment, a planetary asset to be repurposed. Our ancestors, the scientists and engineers who built the fleets that first touched the stars, refused to become footnotes. They refused to hand over their knowledge, their art, their very souls to be cataloged and sanitized by the Xylon technocracy or the serene, silent Orin. So they ran. They gathered what they could, a fleet of colony ships and research vessels, and aimed for the one place in the galaxy nobody ever looked, the Seraphim Veil. They thought we'd die out here, that the radiation would cook us, the asteroids would crush us, or that we'd simply tear each other apart for the last clean liter of water. They were wrong. We survived. We adapted. We became scavengers, whispers in the static, a myth told to frighten consortium pilots who strayed too far from the beacon-lit trade lanes. My name is Kalen, and I am a whisper. My ship, the Stray Dog, is less a vessel and more a collection of scars held together by jury-rigged welds and a stubborn fusion core that groans like an old man getting out of bed. She's an ugly, asymmetrical beast, a scavenger's dream, with magnetic grapples, plasma cutters, and a sensor suite I'd personally tweaked to taste the faint metallic tang of pre-collapse alloys from a dozen clicks away. I was a scrapper, one of the best. We were the lifelines of Tartarus, pushing our rust bucket rigs into the deepest, most dangerous parts of the Veil, hunting for the bones of the old world. We'd find derelict freighters from forgotten wars, shattered probe satellites, and sometimes, if the void was feeling generous, a chunk of an old colony ship with its databanks still partially intact. Those were the real prizes, not for the tech, not really, but for the stories. We'd find logs, personal recordings, fragments of music, a child's drawing saved on a personal datapad. They were reminders of what we were, of a time when humanity looked at the stars with hope instead of fear. Our lives were measured in cycles, in the dwindling reserves of our water purifiers and the decay rate of our city's primary reactor. The foreman, a man named Elias Vance, whose face was a roadmap of plasma burns and worry lines, kept Tartarus running on sheer grit and meticulous rationing. There was no currency, only utility. You were what you could contribute. You could fix a hydroponics unit, you could pilot a rig, you could patch a pressure leak, or you could become fertilizer. It was a simple, brutal calculus that kept us alive. There were no politicians, no grand speeches. There was only the hum of the life support, the clang of hammers on metal, and the endless, silent scream of the veil outside our reinforced viewports. I was chasing a ghost. Our deep-range passive sensors had picked up a flicker, a gravitational anomaly that didn't fit any known celestial model. It was a blip in a sector we called the graveyard, a particularly chaotic field of swirling debris and rogue planetoids where the Veil's interference was at its peak. Most scrappers avoided it. The currents were treacherous, and the junk was mostly worthless rock and ice. But this signature was different. It was old, impossibly old, and it had the faint, unmistakable echo of high-tensile durasteel, the kind they stopped using centuries ago. The stray dog bucked and shuddered as I navigated the debris field, its hull groaning in protest. Ice crystals the size of my fist scraped against the cockpit view screen, and my console flickered with proximity warnings. This was insane. The foreman would have my hide for burning this much fuel on a ghost signal. But my gut, a feeling honed by a decade of dancing with spinning chunks of metal in the dark, told me this was something more. And then I saw it. It wasn't a freighter or a satellite. It was a cathedral, a wreck of impossible scale, half buried in a colossal ice asteroid, its spine broken, its hull pockmarked by millennia of micrometeoroid impacts. It was a phantom from the history books. A ship we were told was just a legend, a symbol of humanity's golden age of exploration. Its name was still faintly visible on the forward command tower, letters 100 meters high, etched into the scorched and pitted hull Odyssey, one of the 3 great colony arcs that had left Earth a century before the collapse, destined for the Andromeda Galaxy. They had vanished without a trace, presumed lost to some unknown stellar phenomenon. Finding it here, in the graveyard of our own galaxy, was like an atheist finding God bleeding in a back alley. It made no sense. My hands trembled as I guided the stray dog closer, my ship a gnat buzzing around a dead leviathan. The Odyssey was dark, silent, a tomb adrift in the screaming void. There were no lights, no energy signatures, nothing. But my passive sensors were still picking up that faint resonance from deep within its shattered hull. A whisper from a ghost. I docked near a gaping wound in its side, where a torpedo or an asteroid had torn through countless decks. The air inside was dead and frigid, a cold that seeped into my suit and chilled me to the bone. Every surface was coated in a layer of crystalline ice. I moved through the massive, silent corridors with my mag boots, my helmet lamp cutting a lonely swathe through the oppressive darkness. I saw the ghosts of its crew everywhere, a frozen hand reaching out from a shattered cryopod, a datapad lying open on a desk, its screen dark, its message forever unread. It was a city of the dead, a monument to a forgotten dream. The signal led me deeper, towards the ship's engineering section, past massive, silent engines that could have moved moons. I found the source in a shielded sublevel, a room that was surprisingly intact. The auxiliary data core. It was a massive, cylindrical device, its surface glowing with a faint, pulsing internal light. The main core was likely shattered, but this backup, this black box, might have survived. It was a fool's hope. Without main power, it was just a dead piece of hardware. But our ancestors had built things to last. I pulled a portable power cell from my pack and jury-rigged a connection to the core's emergency input. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million chance that the internal systems weren't completely fried. I threw the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum filled the chamber, and the light within the core brightened, shifting from a dull red to a soft, ethereal blue. On a nearby terminal, miraculously powered, lines of code began to scroll, too fast to read, a torrent of data from a lost age, and then a single word resolved on the screen, stark and clear against the cascade of symbols. Chimera. Project Chimera. It was a name spoken only in whispers back in Tartarus, a boogeyman from the old world, A terraforming technology so powerful, so dangerous, it was said to be capable of rewriting a planet's entire biosphere in a matter of months. The consortium had outlawed it, declared it an existential threat, and systematically erased almost every mention of it from the public record. They said it was unstable, that it could create monsters or turn worlds into uninhabitable hellscapes. Our ancestors, the ones who fled to the Veil, believed otherwise. They saw it as the ultimate expression of human ingenuity, a tool that could have saved Earth, a key to building new homes among the stars without alien permission. The data stream on the terminal shifted, resolving into a star chart. It wasn't a map of our galaxy. The constellations were alien, the star patterns unfamiliar. It was a map of Andromeda, and on it, a single system was highlighted, a yellow dwarf star with 7 planets. A line of text appeared beneath it, waypoint designation Eden, the location. The Odyssey hadn't been lost. It had been on a mission, a secret exodus to secure the one thing that could guarantee humanity's future. Before I could process the implications, an alarm blared from my wristcom, a piercing shriek that shattered the tomb-like silence. It was the stray dog's proximity alert. Something was out there. I scrambled back through the darkened halls of the dead ship, my heart hammering against my ribs. Had another scrapper followed me? Was it one of the paranoid splinter factions that lived in the deeper Veil? I reached the docking point and peered through the viewport. My blood ran cold. It was a ship I had only ever seen in grainy historical archives, a vessel of sleek, silver lines and predatory grace, utterly alien to the brutal, functional designs of the Remnant. It bore the twin star insignia of the Consortium security fleet. A scout ship. It was hanging in the void a few clicks away, its sensor arrays glowing as they swept across the derelict Odyssey. They hadn't seen my little rust bucket, hidden in the shadow of the larger ship, but they were here. They couldn't be here. No Consortium ship ever ventured this deep into the Veil. It was suicide. The interference should have blinded their sensors, and the gravitic currents should have torn their delicate ship apart, unless they were tracking something. The power surge. My desperate and hopeful act of powering up the auxiliary core had sent out a pulse, a flicker of energy so archaic and strange that it must have stood out against the Veil's background noise like a gunshot in a library. It was a whisper they had heard across the void. I had to run. I severed the data connection, hoping I had downloaded enough. A fragment, a breadcrumb, anything. The core hummed and went dark, the terminal fading to black. I didn't have time to be delicate. I fired my magnetic grapples into the core's casing and ripped the entire cylinder from its housing. It was heavy, unwieldy. But I wasn't leaving it behind. I hauled it back to the stray dog, my muscles screaming in protest, the massive cylinder scraping against the narrow corridors. I threw it into my cargo hold, sealed the hatch, and fired up my engines, keeping them on the lowest possible power. I disengaged from the Odyssey and let the local currents pull me back into the thickest part of the debris field, praying my ship's low signature profile and the Veil's interference would keep me hidden. I watched on my tactical display as the Consortium scout began a careful, methodical approach to the dead colony ship. They were cautious, uncertain of what they had found. That was my only advantage. They were looking for a ghost, not a rat scurrying away with the ghost's soul in its cargo hold. The journey back to Tartarus was a blur of nerve-shredding tension. Every flicker of a sensor, every groan of my ship's hull made me jump. I pushed the stray dog to its limits. the fusion core whining in protest, but I didn't dare drop out of the veil's cover. Hours later, the familiar jagged silhouette of Tartarus appeared on my screen, a welcome sight in the swirling chaos. I broadcast the emergency docking code, and the massive bay doors of our hidden city slid open to receive me. As soon as I was inside and the doors were sealed, the foreman himself was waiting for me on the gantry, his face grim. "Report, Kalen," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You were supposed to be on a standard salvage run." I was too exhausted, too wired to offer a clean report. "I found it." "Elias," I said, my voice hoarse. "I found the Odyssey." A murmur went through the assembled dock workers. The foreman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "That's not possible," he breathed. "Show me." I led him to the cargo bay and showed him the prize, the massive, scarred cylinder of the auxiliary data core. He ran a trembling hand over its surface, his engineer's eyes tracing the ancient design. We hauled it to the main command center, the heart of Tartarus, a cavernous space filled with monitors and humming computer banks. Our best technicians swarmed the device, carefully hooking it up to our own systems. For hours, they worked, coaxing the ancient machine to speak to them. Finally, a single image flickered to life on the main view screen. It was the star chart, the alien constellations, the system designated Eden, and the word that made the blood drain from every face in the room: Chimera. A wave of awe, of disbelief, of raw, primal hope swept through the command center. It was real. The myth was real. The key to our salvation was within our grasp. We could build a new home, a world of our own, free from the consortium's shadow. But as I looked at the foreman's face, I saw not just hope, but a profound, soul-deep fear. He looked from the star chart to me, his eyes boring into mine, seeing not a hero, but a harbinger. He knew what I had done, the risk I had taken, the line I had crossed. He knew that whispers could be heard, even across the void. "You've brought us hope, boy," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the suddenly silent room. "Or you've just signed our death warrant." And far away, on the very edge of the Seraphim Veil, the captain of a sleek, silver consortium scout ship stared at his sensor readings. The strange, archaic energy pulse had vanished, but its point of origin was now fixed. He opened a priority channel to his fleet commander, his voice calm and professional, betraying none of the predatory excitement in his eyes. "Commander," he reported, "the anomaly is gone, but I have a lock on its source. Sending coordinates now. You're not going to believe where it came from." The immediate aftermath of the discovery was not the explosion of unity I might have naively expected. Instead, it was like dropping a match into a sealed tank of volatile gas. The hope was there, a bright, blinding flash, but the pressure of generations of fear and pragmatism instantly tried to smother it. In the command center, the star chart of Eden glowed on the main screen, a silent promise and a terrifying accusation. Elias Vance, the foreman, looked as though he'd aged a decade in the hour since I'd returned. He saw the Chimera data core not as a key, but as a bomb I had just armed and placed in the center of our city. On the other side of the room stood Reese, my oldest friend and the closest thing Tartarus had to a firebrand. Where I was a quiet hunter of ghosts in the void, Reese was a molder of men, the charismatic foreman of the fabrication bays who could turn a speech about welding techniques into a call to arms. His eyes, fixed on the screen, burned with a fervor that was almost religious. "This is it," Reese declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, echoing off the cold rock walls. "This is the answer to every prayer our grandparents whispered in the dark. A new world. Not a rock we cling to, but a world we can shape. We have to go." Elias turned from the core, his face a mask of weary control. Go where? Reese chasing a ghost story from a dead ship. That energy pulse Kalen triggered by waking this thing up was the equivalent of screaming our location into a consortium listening post. The scout ship he saw is just the beginning. The first drop of rain before the hurricane. Our priority is survival, not fantasy. The room fractured along a fault line that had always existed just beneath the surface of our society. The old guard who remembered the stories of the flight from Earth, who knew the consortium's reach and ruthlessness, and the younger generation, my generation, who had only known the scraping, desperate existence of the veil and yearned for something more. The debate raged for days. A low-grade fever that infected every corner of Tartarus, from the hydroponic farms to the deepest mining tunnels. The Chimera core was moved to a secure lab, where our most brilliant and ancient technician, a woman named Anya, began the painstaking process of decrypting its secrets. Anya was a relic herself, one of the last to be born before the Exodus. Her body frail, but her mind a razor-sharp repository of forgotten science. She worked in silence, surrounded by humming consoles, treating the core with the reverence of a priestess handling a holy artifact. While Anya worked, I became a symbol, a lightning rod for the city's divided soul. To Reese and his followers, I was the prophet who had returned from the wilderness with the sacred text. They slapped me on the back in the mess hall. They offered me their rationed stimulants. They looked at me with an unnerving mixture of awe and expectation. To Elias and the Council of Elders, I was a reckless child who had kicked a hornet's nest the size of a solar system. They would stop me in the corridors, their faces etched with concern, reminding me of the precarious balance of our existence, of the thin hull that separated our fragile lives from the screaming void. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The quiet solitude of the scrapper's life replaced by the crushing weight of 1,000 hopes and 1,000 fears. The first breakthrough from Anya's lab only deepened the schism. She managed to unlock the primary schematics for the Chimera device itself. It wasn't a machine in the traditional sense. It was a biological forge, a swarm of nanites designed to deconstruct and reconstruct matter at the molecular level, guided by a programmable matrix. The data showed simulations of it turning a barren rock into a verdant paradise in less than a standard year. Reese projected the images onto the main screen in the command center for all to see time-lapsed renderings of ochre deserts blooming into lush forests, of toxic atmospheres clearing to azure skies. It was intoxicating, a draft of pure hope for a people who had only known recycled air and rationed water. But then came the second part of the data dump. Anya, her face grim, presented Elias with the project lead's personal logs, a man named Dr. Aris Thorne. His words were a chilling counterpoint to the beautiful simulations. Thorne wrote of the Chimera's terrifying potential for error. A single miscalculation in the programming matrix, a single unforeseen environmental variable, could result in catastrophic failure. He described failed tests on remote moons, biospheres that collapsed into gray goo, ecosystems that spawned hyper-aggressive crystalline predators, worlds where the very laws of physics seem to warp and fray at the edges. It is a god's tool. Anya read from Thorne's final entry, her voice trembling slightly. And we are not gods. We have created a key that can unlock any door, but we have no way of knowing what lies on the other side. It might be paradise, or it might be an oblivion of our own making. Elias seized on the logs. You see, he argued, his voice resonating with grim vindication. This is why the consortium banned it. It's too dangerous. We don't have the resources, the knowledge, to wield this kind of power safely. We would be trading a slow death in the Veil for a quick, spectacular one in some godforsaken corner of Andromeda. Reese was unmoved. Every great leap is dangerous. He shot back, his fist striking the council table. Our ancestors were afraid when they first harnessed nuclear power, when they first broke orbit. Fear is the enemy of progress. Thorne's logs are warnings, not prohibitions. We can learn from his mistakes. We have to try. I found myself caught in the middle, my gut churning with a nauseating mix of hope and dread. I had seen the dead dream of the Odyssey, the silent testament to humanity's ambition, but I had also seen the cold, efficient silver of the consortium scout ship, a reminder of the forces that had crushed that ambition. While we debated our future, that future was already closing in on us. In a sterile briefing room, aboard the consortium command station Vigilance, orbiting the civilized world of Xylos, a man named Silas received his orders. Silas was not a soldier. He was an instrument, a special investigator for the Bureau of Sector Security. He was the man the consortium sent when problems needed to be not just solved, but erased from existence. He was lean, with pale eyes that seemed to absorb light, and a stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat. His superior, a portly admiral whose face was permanently flushed with indignation, pointed a fat finger at a holographic display showing the Seraphim Veil. An energy signature. Investigator, the admiral grumbled. Pre-collapse, highly exotic. It came from somewhere deep in this mess. It flared for less than a minute, then vanished. The scout team found a derelict, an old Ark-class ship, but nothing else. No hostiles, no broadcast. Silas stared at the data, his mind processing, connecting dots others couldn't see.
The Ark-class Odyssey was reported lost in the Typhon anomaly 300 years ago, he stated, his voice a calm monotone. Its presence in the Seraphim Veil is illogical. Exactly.
The admiral blustered. It's a ghost, probably some natural stellar phenomenon that mimicked a power signature. But the council is paranoid. They want it investigated, quietly. Take your ship, the Wraith. Go in, confirm the scout's findings, and report back. Standard reconnaissance. Silas nodded, but he knew this was no standard mission. The Veil was remnant territory. The consortium officially denied their existence, writing them off as a ghost story, a pirate myth. But Silas knew the truth. He had spent his career hunting whispers and shadows at the fringes of consortium space. He knew that where there were ghosts, there were people who refused to die, and a power source flaring to life on a 300-year-old ghost ship was not a natural phenomenon. It was a sign of life, a mistake, and Silas's job was to correct mistakes. Back in Tartarus, the stalemate had become unbearable. We were a city holding its breath, paralyzed by indecision. Elias, fearing the consortium's imminent arrival, had ordered all external operations to cease, Our fleet of scrap rigs sat cold and silent in their docking bays. Our supplies were dwindling, but the fear of detection outweighed the fear of starvation. For now, Reese grew more agitated by the day, his followers growing restless. He argued that our only hope was to be proactive, to get back to the Odyssey and retrieve more components for the Chimera project, specifically the control matrix modules Anya had identified as essential from the schematics. We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. Elias and he pleaded in a tense council meeting. We need to prepare for the journey to Eden. We need the rest of that tech. Elias, his face gaunt with stress, finally looked at me. He didn't trust Reese's zealotry, but he trusted my skill in the veil. He saw a third option, a compromise. One ship, he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. Kalen, you take the stray dog. Your mission is reconnaissance only. Get to the Odyssey. See what the consortium scout did. Scan for any remaining activity. You are to engage no one. If you see anything, you run. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. It was a fool's errand dressed up as a compromise, a mission designed to fail safely, to prove to Reese that the path forward was too dangerous. But it was also a chance to get out of the suffocating confines of Tartarus and back into the familiar silence of the void. And, if I was honest with myself, it was a chance to find some answers. Reese insisted I take 2 of his best engineers with me, a pair of siblings named Finn and Ilara, to help if there was any chance of salvaging the control modules. Elias reluctantly agreed, on the condition that my primary mission was still observation. The stray dog slipped out of Tartarus like a thief in the night, its engines running cold, its signature masked by a dozen scrapper tricks. The journey back to the graveyard was tense. The veil seemed darker this time, more menacing. The silence that had once been my comfort now felt pregnant with unseen threats. We arrived at the coordinates of the Odyssey to find it just as I had left it, a colossal tomb half swallowed by ice. The consortium scout was gone. A deep scan of the area revealed nothing. No ships, no probes, no lingering energy signatures. Looks clear, Finn reported from the co-pilot seat, his relief palpable. Ilara, monitoring the passive sensor board, was less certain. I don't know, she murmured. It's too quiet, too clean, like someone swept the place. My gut agreed with her. The consortium didn't just leave a mystery like this unsolved. I took the stray dog on a slow, careful pass along the length of the dead arc, our sensors drinking in every detail. That's when Ilara saw it. Kalen, look, on the hull of the Odyssey, near the main breach, there's something new. I zoomed in with the external cameras. It was a device, small and black, clinging to the hull like a metallic leech. It wasn't remnant tech. It was sleek, sophisticated. A listening post, a tracking beacon, before I could analyze it. Every alarm on my console screamed at once. A massive energy spike bloomed to our port side, where there had been only empty space a second before. The space shimmered, distorted, and a ship materialized from nothing. It was not the scout. This vessel was larger, black as the void itself. A blade of a ship designed for one purpose, killing. It was the Wraith. It hadn't just arrived. It had been there the whole time, cloaked, waiting. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't reconnaissance. It was a trap. Evasive maneuvers, I roared, slamming the thrusters to full. The stray dog, for all her flaws, could move when she had to. We dove into the densest part of the debris field, the ship groaning as I threw it into a tight, corkscrewing dive. On the tactical display, I saw the Wraith didn't even bother with a preliminary scan. It fired. A lance of coherent energy, impossibly fast, sliced through the space where we had been a moment before, vaporizing a 10-ton chunk of asteroid into glowing dust. "They're not trying to hail us," Finn yelled, his knuckles white on the console. "They knew we were here. The leech on the Odyssey must have been a sensor tripwire." The cat and mouse game began. The graveyard, my old hunting ground, was now my only hope of survival. I used the spinning debris as cover, ducking behind planetoids, using their gravity wells to slingshot the stray dog in unpredictable vectors. But the Wraith was relentless. It was faster, more agile, and its pilot was uncannily good, predicting my moves, cutting off my escape routes. This wasn't a standard Navy pilot. This was a Predator. "Their weapon systems are charging again," Ilara cried out. I saw a narrow canyon of ice and rock ahead, a fissure in a massive, shattered moon. It was our only chance. I pushed the engines past the safety limits, the core screaming in protest, and plunged into the trench. Plasma fire from the Wraith seared the ice walls around us, sending up clouds of superheated vapor that momentarily blinded their sensors. For a few precious seconds, we were hidden. "I'm picking up their communications," Ilara said, her fingers flying across her console. "It's heavily encrypted, but I'm getting fragments. They're not talking to a fleet. It's a single, coded transmission to someone named Silas." The name meant nothing to me, but the intent was clear. This was a solo mission, a surgical strike. "Can you get me a full sensor scan of that ship?" I asked, my voice tight. "We need to know what we're up against." As we shot out of the other side of the trench, I looped back, a move so audacious and stupid I hoped they wouldn't expect it. For a brief moment, we were facing them head-on. "Got it," Ilara shouted, and just as she did, another energy lance erupted from the Wraith. I rolled the ship hard, the beam glancing off our port shield, sending a violent shudder through the entire frame. The lights flickered, and the engine coughed, its power output dropping by half. We were hit, wounded. I limped away, diving back into the thickest part of the veil, pushing my damaged ship as hard as I dared. To my astonishment, the Wraith did not immediately pursue. It held its position, its predator's instinct perhaps telling it that the wounded prey was no longer an immediate threat, or that its mission was fulfilled. It had confirmed our existence. That was all it needed. We fled, the stray dog bleeding atmosphere from a dozen microfractures, its port engine a useless wreck. The journey back was a long, terrifying silence. When the doors of Tartarus finally closed behind us, I didn't wait for the docking clamps. I left Finn and Ilara to manage the damage and stormed towards the command center, the captured sensor data burning on a drive in my hand. I burst into the council chamber, where Elias and Reese were still locked in the same tired argument. All heads turned to me, their debate dying in their throats. They saw my face, the grime, the fury, and the cold, hard fear in my eyes. I walked to the main console, slapped the data drive into the port, and brought the image up on the main screen for all to see. It was a full tactical schematic of the Wraith, its stealth capabilities, its advanced energy weaponry, its sensor ghosting technology. It was a ship decades, if not centuries, ahead of anything we could build or salvage. It was a shark, and we were swimmers who had just started bleeding. I turned to face the stunned council, my voice low and raw, cutting through the silence. "The debate is over," I said. "They're already here." The schematic of the Wraith hung in the air of the command center like a death sentence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the city's life support, a sound that suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable. Elias Vance stared at the image. The pragmatism and caution that had defined his leadership shattered. He wasn't looking at a ship. He was looking at an executioner's axe, perfectly honed and impossibly sharp. Reese, for the first time, was speechless. The wild, zealous fire in his eyes was banked, replaced by the cold, sober understanding of the abyss that had just opened beneath them. This wasn't a political entity they could hide from. This was a predator that had picked up their scent. The ghost we had been chasing for a century had finally turned around and seen us. I was the one to finally break the silence, my voice still rough from the adrenaline of the chase. "It was cloaked," I said, pointing to a section of the schematic detailing the ship's stealth systems. It was waiting for us. This wasn't a patrol. It was an ambush. Elias finally tore his eyes from the screen and looked at me, then at Reese, then at the handful of other section foremen in the room. The debate was over. The schism was welded shut by a shared, primal fear. "Get on ya," he commanded, his voice a low, strained whisper. "Get every engineer, every programmer, every pilot, everyone. The city is now on a war footing." But it wasn't a war we could fight. It was a race we had to run. Tartarus transformed overnight. The slow, methodical rhythm of survival was replaced by a frantic, desperate symphony of preparation. The cavernous docking bays, usually holding only a handful of active scrap rigs, became a chaotic, sprawling shipyard. The clang of magnetic hammers echoed through the asteroid 24 hours a cycle. Plasma welders cast stark, dancing shadows on the rock walls, smelling of ozone and burning metal. Every ship we had, from the smallest single-pilot rock hopper to the bulkiest, slow-moving ore hauler, was being refitted. We were turning our tools into lifeboats. I found myself in an unfamiliar role, ripped from the solitary cockpit of the stray dog and thrust into the heart of the command center. I was the only one who had seen the Wraith, the only one who had danced with it and lived. I spent my days briefing pilots, running simulations based on the Wraith's capabilities, trying to teach our lumbering, clumsy flock of ships how to evade a wolf. We were a city of scavengers, not warriors. Our ships were designed to pull things apart, not to fight. We bolted salvaged armor plates to the hulls of freighters, jury-rigged mining lasers into defensive turrets, and stripped every non-essential system to bolster the shields and engines. It was like giving sticks and stones to farmers and telling them to fight a legionary. We all knew it, but the work continued, fueled by a terror that was more potent than any stimulant. Meanwhile, Anya and her team worked feverishly on the Chimera data core, their lab becoming the high temple of our new religion of escape. The star chart to Eden was our promised land. The Chimera, our only prayer of making it habitable. But the data they were unearthing was revealing the true, staggering scale of the Odyssey's mission. "It's not a standard jump drive," Anya explained to Elias, Reese, and me, her face illuminated by the holographic projection of a complex energy matrix. The Odyssey wasn't built for interstellar travel. It was built for intergalactic travel. The drive is a theoretical device called a cascade engine. She brought up a simulation. It showed a ship not tearing a single hole in space-time, but creating a chain reaction, a series of precisely calculated, sequential wormholes, a cascade that would allow a vessel to cross the 2.5 million light-year chasm between our galaxy and Andromeda in a matter of months, not millennia. It was a feat of engineering so far beyond our own capabilities, it was functionally magic. We have the theory, Anya continued, pointing to the reams of equations and schematics scrolling on the screen. We have the fuel calculations, the navigational requirements, but we don't have the engine itself, the core I/O controller, the device that initiates the cascade. It's still on the Odyssey. A cold stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. We had the map to the promised land, but the key to the gate was back in the monster's lair. Then we go back, Reese said immediately, his voice ringing with renewed conviction. We assemble a salvage team. We take what we need. Don't be a fool, Elias countered, his old caution flaring. The Wraith is still out there. Kalen was lucky to escape once. They won't make the same mistake twice. They'll be watching that wreck, waiting. As if to punctuate his words, an alarm blared through the command center. It wasn't a proximity alert or a system failure. It came from the docking bay, from my ship. Finn, the engineer who had been with me on the recon mission, appeared on the comms, his face pale and sweating. Kalen, you need to see this. I ran, with Elias and Reese close behind. In the bay, the stray dog was a mess of exposed wiring and stripped hull plates as Finn and his team worked on the repairs. He led me to the port engine, the one that had taken the glancing blow from the Wraith's energy lance. There, clinging to a power conduit deep within the engine housing, was a speck of metal no larger than my thumbnail. It was dark, non-reflective, and had been fused to the conduit by the energy blast. If the beam had hit a meter to the left or right, we would never have found it. It's a micro-tracker, Finn whispered, his voice trembling. Consortium military grade, passive signal, powered by our own ship's energy bleed. It's been broadcasting our position since the second they fired on us. The air left my lungs, the relative safety of Tartarus, the one constant in our lives, evaporated in that single, horrifying instant. The wolf hadn't just seen us run. It had tagged us. It had followed us home. We were no longer hidden. We were a target, pinned on a map, and the hunter was on its way. 1,000 light years away, Investigator Silas stood on the bridge of the Wraith. The ship was a ghost, its cloaking field engaged, drifting silently in the swirling debris of a barren asteroid field on the edge of the Seraphim Veil. He wasn't rushing. Rushing was for brutes and fools. He was a creature of patience and precision. On his main tactical display, a single pulsing green dot marked the location of Tartarus. The data from the micro-tracker had given him everything: the asteroid's trajectory, its rotation, its composition. He had even identified the faint, cyclical energy signatures of the hidden hangar doors. "They are scrappers," he murmured to himself, his pale eyes fixed on the dot. "Primitives, living in a hollowed-out rock, and yet they had the means to activate the data core of a long-lost Ark." He had already sent his initial report. The discovery of a hidden, unregistered human settlement in a prohibited zone was significant, but the activation of the Odyssey's core was the real prize. The Bureau was very, very interested in Project Chimera. The Admiral's orders were clear: confirm the location of the settlement, identify their capabilities, do not engage, await the fleet. But Silas had a different interpretation of his orders. A fleet was a blunt instrument. It would smash the asteroid to dust. And, with it, any answers. He wanted to know how these remnant had found the Odyssey, what they knew, what they had taken. He needed to dissect the creature, not just crush it. His ship was a scalpel, and he intended to make the first cut himself. Set a course, he said to the empty bridge, his voice calm and quiet. Slow approach, maximum stealth. I want to be in orbit of that rock in 3 cycles. I want to be close enough to hear them breathe before they know I'm there. Back in the command center of Tartarus, panic had given way to a grim, terrifying resolve. The tracker was a death sentence, but it was also a catalyst. We didn't have months to prepare our fleet. We didn't have weeks. Based on the Wraith's probable speed, we had days, maybe less. We have no choice, I said, my voice cutting through the terrified arguments. We have to go back to the Odyssey. We have to get that Cascade engine core. It's the only way. It's suicide, one of the foremen shouted. The Wraith is out there, and it's coming here, Reese roared back. Would you rather die cowering in this rock or fighting for a chance to escape? Kalen is right. It's the only move we have left. Elias looked at the tactical display, at the glowing schematic of the Consortium Hunter ship, and then at the star chart of Eden, a distant, impossible dream for generations. His goal had been to keep his people safe by keeping them hidden. Now, that very strategy was about to become their tomb. He straightened his shoulders, the weight of his decision settling on him like a shroud. Assemble a team, he said, his voice now steady, imbued with the authority he had wielded for decades. You'll take our 2 fastest ships, the Stray Dog, once it's patched, and the Swift Strike, Reese's modified survey ship. It's the only other vessel we have with a decent enough engine-to-mass ratio to outrun the Wraith if it comes to it. He turned to me. Kalen, you'll lead. You know the ship, and you know the enemy. Then he looked at Reese. Reese, you'll go with him. You represent the will of this city, and you'll need your best engineers, the ones who can extract that drive core without blowing you all to hell. The mission was insane, a desperate last-ditch gamble. We were planning a heist to steal a piece of magical technology from a ghost ship in a graveyard haunted by a hunter who already knew our name and our address. It was a mission with almost no chance of success. But as I looked around the command center at the faces of my people, at the mixture of terror and fierce, defiant hope in their eyes, I knew we had to try. Our entire future, the very survival of the remnant, now rested on a single, desperate run back into the screaming darkness of the Veil. The mission to retrieve the Cascade engine core was a frantic, high-stakes ballet of engineering and desperation. We didn't have time for finesse. The Stray Dog was patched with industrial welds that glowed a dull cherry red, its port engine a Frankenstein's monster of salvaged parts that whined and shuddered ominously. Reese's ship, the Swift Strike, a long-range geological surveyor, was faster and more robust, but it was stripped of its scientific instruments, its sensor bays now packed with extra power cells and emergency life support. Our crews were a mix of the best and the most desperate Reese's top fabricators, Finn and Alara among them, their hands steady with plasma cutters and mag wrenches, and a handful of veteran pilots, men and women whose faces were etched with the geography of 1,000 close calls in the Veil. We left under a shroud of absolute calm silence, slipping from Tartarus like two ghosts leaving their own tomb. The city we left behind was a hive of frantic activity. Every able-bodied person working to prepare the civilian fleet for a blind, desperate jump into the unknown the moment the HFY returned with the key. The weight of every one of those lives pressed down on us, a tangible force heavier than any gravity well. The journey back to the graveyard was a nerve-shredding exercise in paranoia. Every flicker on the sensor screen, every ghost image created by the veil's interference sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I flew a deliberately erratic course, hugging the densest debris fields, using the spinning carcasses of dead moons as cover, making our trail as difficult to follow as possible, assuming we weren't already being watched. We arrived at the coordinates of the Odyssey to a scene of chilling stillness. The dead ark hung in the void, a silent, colossal monument to a forgotten age. There was no sign of the wraith, no energy readings, no sensor ghosts. Nothing. It was either gone or it was cloaked. Waiting. This feels wrong. Reese's voice crackled over the tight beam comm, the short-range frequency we dared to use. It's a baited trap. I know, I sent back. But the bait is the only food we've got. We go in fast and hard. Ilara, run a continuous passive sensor sweep. The second you get a hint of a cloak field engaging or a weapon system charging, you scream it. We don't wait to ask questions. I docked the stray dog at the same breach I'd used before, while the Swift Strike held position a few kilometers away, its engines hot, ready to provide covering fire or a fast exit. Reese and his team, including Finn, joined me, their faces grim behind their helmet visors. We moved through the frozen or silent corridors of the Odyssey with practiced urgency, our mag boots clanking in the dead air. The path to the engineering section was now familiar, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't the silence of the dead. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. We reached the Cascade engine room, a vast, cathedral-like space dominated by a spherical device 10 meters in diameter, humming with a barely perceptible, latent energy. At its heart, protected by layers of crystalline conduits, was the I/O controller Anya had described, a device the size of a man's torso, glowing with a soft, internal blue light. There it is, Finn breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. The key to Andromeda. Reese's team swarmed the device, their plasma cutters igniting with sharp hisses, casting flickering, demonic shadows on the walls. They worked with a desperate and focused energy, slicing through the reinforced casing, their movements precise and economical. I stood guard at the entrance to the chamber, my rifle up, my senses stretched to their breaking point, listening to the silence, waiting for it to break. And then it did. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the ship's ancient, dormant systems, a flicker of lights in a distant corridor, a low thrum of power vibrating through the deck plates beneath my boots. Someone else was on the ship. They're here, I hissed into my comm. Reese, how much longer? 5 minutes, maybe 4. He shot back, not looking up from his work. The outer casing is almost off. The thrumming grew stronger. Lights began to flicker on down the long corridor leading to engineering, not the ship's main lights, but the cold, sterile white of portable utility lamps. Then I saw them, figures, clad in matte black environmental suits, moving with a fluid, disciplined grace that spoke of years of training. They weren't soldiers in bulky armor. They were phantoms, armed with sleek pulse rifles, consortium spec ops. At their lead was a figure who moved with a different kind of purpose, a calm, deliberate stride that was more unnerving than any sprint. He carried no rifle, only a sidearm holstered at his hip. As he stepped into the light, his helmet retracted, revealing the pale, impassive face of Investigator Silas. Our eyes met across the 100 meters of frozen corridor. There was no surprise in his expression, only a calm, analytical curiosity, as if he were observing a new species of insect. A firefight erupted. My pilots, positioned farther down the hall, opened up with their rifles, the crackle of pulse fire echoing in the cavernous space. The consortium troopers moved with terrifying efficiency, dropping into cover, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. Their weapons were quieter, more precise, their shots stitching neat, glowing holes in the metal bulkheads. Our own rifles seemed loud and crude by comparison. "They're cutting us off," I yelled into the comm, firing a burst towards the advancing troopers. "Reese, we have to go now." "Almost there," came the frantic reply, punctuated by the high-pitched screech of a plasma cutter hitting a final support bracket. Silas didn't even flinch at the chaos erupting around him. He simply raised a hand, and two of his troopers detached from the main group, flanking out into the service tunnels that lined the corridor. They were going to bypass us, to hit the engineering room directly. There was no time. "Leave it, we're leaving," I ordered, but I knew Reese wouldn't. He was too close, too invested. I fell back towards the engineering bay, laying down suppressing fire. The bolts from my rifle splashing harmlessly off the trooper's advanced body armor. I reached the doorway just as a triumphant shout came from Reese. "Got it!" I saw him and Finn lifting the glowing blue core from its housing. It was heavier than it looked, and they struggled with the dead weight of it. At that exact moment, Silas's flanking troopers burst through a service hatch inside the engineering room, their rifles raised. "Reese, behind you!" I screamed. Reese turned, his eyes wide with surprise. He and Finn dropped the core, its heavy casing hitting the deck with a loud clang. Reese shoved Finn towards the exit and brought his own rifle up. But he was too slow. A single precise shot from a trooper hit him square in the chest. He was thrown backward against the engine housing, a look of stunned disbelief on his face, before slumping to the floor. "No," I roared, a wave of pure, hot rage surging through me. I emptied my rifle's charge pack at the troopers, forcing them back for a precious second. Finn, his face a mask of terror, grabbed the core and began dragging it towards the exit. "Get it to the ship," I yelled, pulling a plasma grenade from my belt. "Go." I threw the grenade, not at the troopers, but at the massive energy conduits lining the ceiling above them. The explosion was deafening. The conduits ruptured, showering the corridor in a blinding cascade of energy and molten metal, creating a temporary wall of lethal fire. It wouldn't hold them for long. I grabbed Reese's body, his dead weight a terrible, anchoring reality, and began dragging him back the way we came. The surviving members of our team laid down covering fire, a chaotic, desperate retreat through the tomb ship. We made it back to the stray dog under a hail of enemy fire. The ship's hull rang with the impact of pulse rounds as we scrambled inside. I hauled Reese's body onto the deck, his bloodless face a permanent accusation. Finn shoved the Cascade engine core into the cockpit, its glow seeming to mock the darkness of our failure. "The swift strike is providing cover," Ilara shouted from the pilot seat, her voice strained. But the Wraith just decloaked. It's on an intercept course. I scrambled into the co-pilot seat, my hands slick with Reese's blood. On the screen, I saw it. The blade-like ship was moving to cut off our escape route, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. But the swift strike, true to its name, was darting in, firing its jury-rigged mining lasers, a gnat trying to distract a hawk. It was a suicidal gesture, but it bought us the seconds we needed. "Get us out of here, Alara, now!" I yelled, my voice cracking. Alara slammed the throttles forward. The stray dog leaped into the void, its patched-up engine screaming in protest. A lance of energy from the Wraith sliced past our stern, so close I felt the heat of it through the hull. I watched on the tactical display as the swift strike took a direct hit. The ship didn't explode, it simply vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of white light, its crew and its sacrifice erased from existence in an instant. The loss was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. But there was no time for grief. "They're right behind us," Ilara said, her voice a dead monotone. "They're faster. They'll have a firing solution in 30 seconds. We were a wounded deer fleeing a cheetah. There was no outrunning it. Not like this." My eyes fell on the glowing blue cylinder sitting on the cockpit floor between us. The key to Andromeda, the source of all our hope and all our pain. An idea, born of pure, distilled desperation, bloomed in my mind. It was insane. It was probably impossible. It was the only chance we had. "Get Anya on a tight beam," I commanded, my fingers already flying across my own console, pulling up the schematics we had downloaded. "Tell her we have the core, and tell her to get ready for the craziest bit of field engineering in human history." I looked from the glowing core to the pursuing predator on my screen. We couldn't outrun it, but maybe, just maybe, with the power of a god sitting on our floor, we could disappear. The communication link to Tartarus was a faint, crackling thread, a lifeline stretched to the point of snapping. Anya's voice, usually calm and precise, was edged with a tremor of pure disbelief. I spoke fast, a torrent of frantic technical jargon and desperate instruction. Ilara repeating the most critical parameters as I dictated them. "We have the Cascade Core. Anya." I relayed, my eyes flicking between the pursuing Wraith and the complex wiring diagrams on my console. "But we're a sitting duck. We have to make the jump here. Now. We need to initiate a micro-cascade. Not intergalactic. Not even interstellar. Just a jump to the system's outer rim." "Kalen, you're talking about field activating a Cascade engine controller on a salvage vessel with no drive housing, using a Stardog's fusion core as the primary energy source." Anya's voice rose, breaking with incredulity. "The power draw alone will vaporize your ship, and the calibration, the math is impossible to do in real time. In combat, on a damaged drive core. Impossible is what we do!" "Anya," I snapped back, my adrenaline burning off the last remnants of fear. "We have 20 seconds before the Wraith gets a clean shot. I need the dampening sequences. I need the initial phase coordinates. Send me the bare minimum. We're going to use the core's own power bleed to establish the wormhole's nascent singularity, and then we jump off of it." It was a technological Hail Mary. The Cascade engine worked by creating a series of stable, chained wormholes. I wasn't going to try and build the chain. I was going to try and kickstart the first, unstable link with a massive surge of power, and then force my ship through it before it collapsed. A micro jump, barely 1,000 kilometers, just enough to escape the Wraith's firing arc and create a massive gravitic energy disturbance that would momentarily blind and confuse the hunter. I ripped open the panel beneath the cockpit, exposing the main power conduits running from the stray dog's ancient, sputtering fusion core. I grabbed a pair of heavily insulated magnetic clamps and began attaching the cascade core to the conduits, bypassing every safety and buffer. Ilara, her hands flying across the terminal, input the raw, hastily transmitted code from Anya, her fingers moving on instinct, every one of her years of engineering training distilled into this single, impossible task. 10 seconds to firing solution, Ilara yelled, her eyes locked on the tactical screen. The Wraith was a silent, black nightmare, its primary energy cannon already glowing with a lethal crimson light. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the immense power coursing through the system. The cascade core began to pulse with a violent, blinding blue light, its surface vibrating with impossible energy. The interior of the stray dog groaned, the metal of the hull warping under the immense energy surge. The main power was dying. I had diverted everything to the core. Life support was flickering, the lights going dim. We were blind, half dead, and hurtling towards a quantum singularity. 5 seconds, Ilara screamed. The sound was swallowed by the high-pitched, terrifying shriek of the cascade core, a sound that felt less like technology and more like a star being torn apart. Now, I roared, slamming the main power coupling. The ship's fusion core committed the ultimate sacrifice. The core's light exploded. For a fraction of a second, the space in front of the stray dog shimmered, a perfect, mirror-like surface appearing out of nothing. It was a nascent wormhole, a beautiful, impossible hole in the universe. Then, everything went white. When the light faded, the stray dog was drifting silently, dead in the water. We weren't 1,000 kilometers away. We were in a different sector entirely, a quiet corner of the Veil I didn't recognize. The jump had been uncontrolled, a blind throw of the dice, but we had survived. The cascade core, still glowing faintly, was inert, fused to the conduits, the residual power surge having shut down the stray dog's systems entirely. I reached out a trembling hand and slapped the emergency auxiliary power switch. The lights flickered back on, barely a fraction of their normal intensity. "Ilara," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Report." Ilara's eyes were wide, focused on the tactical display. We're alive. Main systems are fried, but life support is barely holding. We're deep in Sector Zeta and the Wraith." Her voice trailed off, a mixture of awe and horror in her tone. On the tactical screen, where the Wraith should have been, there was only a colossal, swirling cloud of superheated plasma and dust. The implosion of our micro-wormhole, the massive gravitic energy spike of the uncontrolled jump, had hit the hunter ship at point-blank range, at the very moment it was about to fire. It hadn't destroyed the Wraith entirely, but it had bought us the time we needed. It had created enough chaos to force the hunter to retreat, or at least go silent to assess the damage. We had escaped, but we were stranded, and we were one man lighter. The silent journey back to Tartarus was the longest of my life. Reese's body lay under a thermal blanket in the cargo hold, a symbol of our tragic, necessary loss. The cascade core, now a silent, immobile lump of glowing blue metal, was secured to the floor of the cockpit, the object of both salvation and damnation. We slipped back into Tartarus like a pair of wounded dogs, the stray dog barely holding together. The city, which had been a hive of desperate activity, was paralyzed by fear. Elias met us at the dock, his face etched with a deeper sorrow than I had ever seen. The loss of the Swift Strike and its crew, the death of Reese, the confirmation that the consortium had located us. It was too much for the old guard to bear. I presented Elias with the Cascade Core, the key to their future. It was received not with jubilation, but with the silence of profound grief. "Reese is dead," I stated, my voice flat. "The Wraith is damaged, but it knows where we are. It's only a matter of cycles before it returns. And next time, it won't be alone. We are out of time." The city council gathered one last time. There was no argument, no dissent. The choice had been made for us. Survival was no longer an option. Escape was the imperative. Anya, working for 2 straight cycles without sleep, managed to download the last of the Cascade Core's data. The core was spent, burned out by the micro jump, but the data was intact. It contained the final calculations, the precise sequence needed to initiate the full intergalactic cascade jump. "We have the coordinates for Eden," Anya announced, her voice exhausted but resolute. "And we have the sequence. We just need a power source strong enough to initiate it." The only power source strong enough was Tartarus itself, the city's main fusion reactor, a sprawling, kilometer-long system that provided life and heat to our entire civilization would have to be sacrificed. We would turn our home into a massive, one-time jump drive, an ark to carry our fleet of scrap rigs and repurposed freighters across the void. The evacuation was swift and brutal. Every citizen of Tartarus was assigned a place on one of the 87 vessels of our cobbled-together fleet. Non-essential systems were cannibalized for fuel, for parts, for temporary shielding. We were stripping the skin from our city to build the wings of our escape. In the last hours before the final countdown, I stood with Elias on the main observation deck, looking out at the endless, screaming black of the Seraphim Veil. The city was almost empty now, the silence a strange, echoing comfort. "I chose wrong, Kalen," Elias said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the void. "I chose to hide, and it almost killed us all. Reese was right. We had to be bold." "You chose survival, Elias," I countered. "You kept us alive until the chance came. That's not a wrong choice." He looked at me, a flicker of the old strength returning to his eyes. "Go. Kalen, you've earned the stars. Take them." I left the observation deck and went to my new command, the bridge of the largest salvage hauler in our fleet, the Ironclad, which was positioned at the heart of the assembly. I sat in the captain's chair, surrounded by the tense, expectant faces of my pilots and engineers. Ilara, her face pale but determined, was beside me. The moment had arrived. "Final systems check," I announced into the command channel, my voice amplified across the entire fleet. "Last call for Tartarus. Initiate reactor override sequence. Divert all available power to the Cascade Matrix. Deep within the hollowed-out rock, the massive fusion reactor went into controlled overload, the culmination of a century of stored energy being funneled into a single, explosive purpose. The core of Tartarus began to glow, its heat building to impossible levels. On the tactical screen, 100 kilometers out, a ripple appeared in the void. It was the Wraith, its stealth systems barely holding. Too late, too slow. It was closing fast, having followed the energy signature of the overloading reactor, but it was too far. The first, beautiful, terrifying shimmer of the Cascade Singularity appeared directly beneath the assembled fleet, fed by the screaming power of our dying city. The wormhole opened, a maelstrom of light and impossible physics, a gateway to the next galaxy. All ships enter the singularity I commanded, pushing the throttles of the ironclad forward. Maximum speed, the massive hauler plunged into the maelstrom, followed by the rest of the remnant fleet, a long, desperate chain of humanity fleeing its own extinction. As the ironclad crossed the threshold, I looked back one last time. The Wraith was rushing toward the collapsing singularity, a black blade slicing through the void, its energy cannon already charging for a final, desperate shot. But it was too late. The last of our ships vanished into the light, and the Tartarus Cascade, the controlled collapse of a civilization's home into a weapon of escape, snapped shut, leaving a violent, unreadable energy storm in its wake. We were gone. We emerged from the Cascade into a new galaxy, a star-filled panorama I had never seen before. Andromeda, the sheer number of stars, the overwhelming sense of space, was breathtaking. We were a wounded, tiny fleet of scavengers, a ghost ship of refugees, limping through the unfamiliar dark. I looked at the coordinates on the screen. Eden. We were far, impossibly far, but we had the destination, and we had the will to reach it. Ilara looked at me, her eyes reflecting the star-filled void. "What now, Commander?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked around the bridge, at the tired, resolute faces of the last of the remnant. We had paid a terrible price. We had lost our home, lost our friends, lost our illusion of safety, but we had saved the core of who we were. I straightened in the captain's chair, the weight of the new command settling on my shoulders. "Now," I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. "We finish the job our ancestors started. We find Eden, and then we build a new home, one piece of scrap at a time, and we wait, because one day the ghosts are going to come back to haunt the living."